the resort town where Madeleine McCann went missing 18 years ago. But a few miles to the east earlier today, we were watching as German and Portuguese authorities were conducting that second day of searches.
They introduced me to Christian, told me it was his best friend, and we invited him, come and have a drink with me and his accomplice, because I was friendly with his accomplice, who we took food to help him and his children. And then he started to cry and confess that he was going to get involved with Bruckner to take a child from Praia da Luz, which I just thought was, crazy to hear that. And he told me...
Picture this. It's March 2017, nearly a decade after the world's most famous missing child case began. A hidden camera, positioned on a remote hillside in Portugal, captures something that should be impossible. Two figures walking slowly, deliberately, through terrain that has no marked trails, no tourist attractions, no reason for anyone to be there. The man pauses at a small circle of stones shaped like a heart. The woman kneels beside a pink flower that seems deliberately placed. They're not hiking. They're not sightseeing. They're returning to something. Someone. And when you see who these people are, your blood will run cold. The figures on that grainy surveillance footage are Kate and Jerry McCann, the parents who, for 17 years, have maintained that their daughter Madeleine was abducted from their holiday apartment. Yet here they are, captured on camera, visiting a spot that no official investigation has ever connected to the case. A spot that exists only in the nightmares of one mother's tortured sleep, and in the obsessive research of one man who refused to believe the story the world was told. If you're already feeling that chill of recognition, that sense that something fundamental about this case has been hidden from you, then smash that like and subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. And I promise you, by the end of this investigation, you'll never look at this case the same way again. The man behind that hidden camera was Bert Stellander, a retired Norwegian military police officer who had spent 7 years working alone, asking questions that no one else dared to ask. While the world focused on the official story of May 3, 2007, Stellander was investigating a different date entirely. May 2nd. The day Kate McCann described in her private diary as, quote, "the night of all nights," end quote. A phrase so loaded with meaning, so heavy with implication, that it haunted him for years. Why would a mother mark the day before her daughter's supposed abduction as the emotional pinnacle of her experience? Why would parents, 17 years later, keep returning to an unmarked hillside that appears nowhere in official police reports? And why, when Stellander sent them an anonymous message suggesting that something was about to be discovered, did they not go to the police, but instead return immediately to that exact spot? The footage Stellander captured doesn't just show two people walking. It shows behavior, pattern, ritual. The kind of compulsive returning that psychologists call romanticizing the grave, a documented phenomenon where those involved in a traumatic death, whether by accident or design, find themselves drawn back to the location over and over again. Not to hide evidence but to remember, to mourn, to seek some kind of twisted redemption. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand why Kate and Jerry McCann were on that hillside in 2017, we need to go back to the beginning. Not to May 3, 2007, the date the world knows by heart, but to the day before. To the night that Kate herself called the night of all nights. To the evening when, according to Bert Stellander's theory, everything went wrong. The official story tells us that on the evening of May 3, while Kate and Jerry dined with friends at the nearby Tapas restaurant, their daughter Madeleine was snatched from her bed by an unknown abductor. The parents had been checking on their children every 30 minutes. Everything was fine until it wasn't. At 10 p.m., Kate discovered that Madeleine was gone, and her famous scream of, "they've taken her," echoed across the resort. But what if none of that was true? What if May 3 wasn't the night of tragedy, but the night of performance? What if the real story, the one that's been hidden for 17 years, happened 24 hours earlier? Stellander's investigation began with a simple question that no one else seemed to be asking. If your child vanished in the night, if you were dealing with every parent's worst nightmare, would you be able to give police statements that aligned perfectly with your spouse's? Would you remember exact times, precise details, perfect sequences of events? Would you be emotionally composed enough to coordinate your story with 6 other friends, ensuring that everyone's testimony supported the same timeline? The answer, according to forensic psychology, is no. Trauma fractures memory. Grief scrambles details. Fear makes people contradict themselves, forget crucial information, mix up sequences. But that's not what happened with the McCann case. Every single person who was supposed to be a witness delivered statements that supported each other with uncanny precision. They didn't just remember the same events, they described them using eerily similar language. This isn't normal. This isn't how memory works under extreme stress. This is what happens when people rehearse a story until it becomes indistinguishable from truth, even in their own minds. And then there was the morning jog. On May 2nd, just hours before Madeleine would officially disappear, a photographer captured Jerry McCann and his friend David Payne running along a dusty path near the local church. At first glance it seemed innocent. Two friends getting exercise on their holiday. But when Jerry later wrote about this jog in his blog, he provided an unusual amount of detail. He mentioned that the run took exactly 19 minutes. He described the terrain as challenging but scenic. He called it very enjoyable. Bert Stellander found this level of specificity suspicious. So he did something simple but telling. He put on his running shoes, stood at the exact same starting point, and ran the identical route at a steady pace. His time: 12 minutes. Not 19. The difference wasn't just 7 minutes, it was 7 minutes of narrative weight, 7 minutes of false memory, 7 minutes that suggested this wasn't just a casual morning run being recalled, but a carefully constructed alibi being documented. What was Jerry McCann really doing during those extra 7 minutes? And why did he feel compelled to write about this particular jog in such specific detail just weeks after his daughter vanished? The answer, Stellander believes, lies in understanding what he calls controlled visibility. It's a concept from military strategy and behavioral psychology. When you need to be in a certain location for reasons you can't reveal, you first visit that location openly, visibly, with witnesses for innocent reasons. You normalize your presence there. You make it unremarkable. So that when you return later, alone, in the dark, for your real purpose, anyone who might have seen you will think nothing of it. The morning jog wasn't exercise. It was reconnaissance. It was Jerry McCann familiarizing himself with the terrain he would need to navigate later. It was the establishment of an alibi before the crime was even committed. But I can see the skepticism in your mind. This sounds like conspiracy thinking, right? These are just grieving parents being scrutinized unfairly by internet detectives and attention-seeking investigators. Except that's not where this evidence comes from. It comes from official police files. It comes from forensic analysis. It comes from behavioral experts and linguistic analysts who have studied this case for nearly 2 decades. It comes from cadaver dogs that alerted to the scent of human decomposition in the McCann's rental car, a vehicle they didn't acquire until 25 days after Madeleine was reported missing. It comes from DNA evidence that showed 15 out of 19 markers matching Madeleine McCann in the trunk of that same car. It comes from Kate McCann's own words in her diary, words that revealed emotional states that don't match the official timeline. Most importantly, it comes from that hidden camera footage that shows Kate and Jerry McCann, 17 years later, still visiting a location that should mean nothing to them if their daughter was simply abducted by a stranger. Still returning to a hillside that matches, with disturbing precision, the location Kate dreamed about, the place where she saw her daughter's body buried among pink flowers. If you're feeling your heart rate increase, if you're starting to question everything you thought you knew about this case, then you're exactly where you need to be. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, because you're about to become part of an investigation that spans continents and decades. You're about to discover evidence that has been hiding in plain sight, protected by silence, sealed by fear, and buried beneath a story that was told so well, so convincingly, that the entire world believed it. But before we dive deeper into that hidden footage and what it reveals about the McCann's secret visits to the hillside, we need to understand what really happened on May 2, 2007. We need to explore the entry in Kate McCann's diary that she never intended the world to see. We need to examine the language she used to describe that night, and why a mother would mark the evening before her daughter's disappearance as the most emotionally significant moment of her entire experience. Because once you understand what the night of all nights really means, once you see how it connects to dreams and symbols and 17 years of secret visits to unmarked graves, you'll realize that this case was never really about a missing child. It was about how far people will go to protect a secret that's too terrible to confess. The hidden camera captured more than just 2 figures on a hillside. It captured the end of the greatest deception in modern criminal history. And you're about to see exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. Kate McCann's diary was never meant for public eyes. Hidden away in the private thoughts of a mother dealing with unimaginable trauma, it contained raw, unfiltered emotions that revealed far more than any carefully prepared police statement ever could. And buried within those pages was a single phrase that would eventually unravel the entire official narrative of her daughter's disappearance. May 2, 2007. Kate described it as, quote, the night of all nights, end quote. Not May 3, when Madeleine supposedly vanished. Not any of the desperate days that followed, when search teams combed beaches and police interviewed hundreds of witnesses. May 2. The day before the world learned Madeleine McCann's name. Why would a mother mark that specific date as the emotional apex of her experience? What made May 2 so significant that it overshadowed even the night of her daughter's supposed abduction? The answer, according to Bert Stellander and a growing number of investigators, is that May 2 wasn't just another day of their holiday. It was the day Madeleine McCann died. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what I'm about to show you about that diary entry and the events of May 2 will fundamentally change how you see this entire case. The evidence isn't hidden in some conspiracy theory or internet speculation. It's written in Kate McCann's own words, captured in her own handwriting, preserved in her own private thoughts. The diary entry for May 2 is unlike any other in the entire document. Kate pours her love into words directed at her daughter. Quote, my sweetheart, my darling, my love, my companion. I love you more than anything. I'm going to dream that I'm lying by your side, end quote. It's beautiful. It's heartbreaking. But it's also final. It reads like a farewell, not a good night. It reads like a mother saying goodbye. No similar entry exists for May 3. Nothing approaching that level of emotional intensity appears for any subsequent date. The night her daughter supposedly vanished, the night that should have been seared into her memory with unbearable clarity, passes with barely a mention. How is that possible? How does a mother write a love letter to her daughter on Tuesday but have nothing to say about the night that same daughter disappeared on Wednesday? Forensic psychologists have a term for this kind of emotional displacement. They call it leakage. It occurs when the conscious mind tries to suppress traumatic truth, but the subconscious betrays that suppression through behavior, language, or in this case, timing. The real emotional weight falls where it belongs chronologically, not where the manufactured story places it. But the diary wasn't the only evidence pointing to May 2 as the crucial date. Restaurant staff at the Tapas bar reported something that directly contradicted the timeline Kate and Jerry had given to police. On the night of May 2, both parents were absent from their table for extended periods. Jerry was gone for over half an hour. Kate left the table shortly after. These weren't the quick 15-minute checks they claimed to make on their children. These were long, unaccounted for absences that gave them more than enough time to deal with whatever crisis had unfolded back at apartment 5A. The staff remembered because it was unusual. Dishes had to be reheated. The group's dinner rhythm was disrupted. But when police asked about it later, when these same staff members were pressed for details about May 3, suddenly their memories became fuzzy. They couldn't quite recall who left when or for how long. It was as if the significance of May 2 had been deliberately obscured, buried beneath the more dramatic narrative of May 3. This is where the sophistication of the cover-up becomes apparent. This wasn't a panic response or a hasty attempt to hide evidence. This was methodical, strategic. It involved not just Kate and Jerry but their entire social circle. The so-called Tapas 7, the group of friends dining with them each night, had to coordinate their stories. They had to agree on timelines, synchronize their memories, and maintain that synchronization under intense police scrutiny. And they succeeded. When Portuguese police interviewed each member of the group separately, their statements aligned with mathematical precision. They all remembered the same checking schedule. They all described the same lighting conditions in the apartment. They all recounted the same conversations, the same concerns, the same sequence of events leading up to Madeleine's supposed abduction. But here's what's disturbing about that level of consistency. Memory doesn't work that way. Real memories, especially traumatic ones, are messy. They're fragmented. Different people notice different details, remember different conversations, focus on different aspects of the same events. When multiple witnesses give statements that align too perfectly, forensic psychologists become suspicious. Not because the witnesses are necessarily lying, but because their memories may have been contaminated through repetition, discussion, and unconscious collaboration. It's called artificial synchronicity, and it's exactly what happens when a group of people rehearse a version of events until that version becomes indistinguishable from actual memory. The result isn't conscious deception. It's manufactured truth that even the participants begin to believe. But despite their careful coordination, cracks began to show in the official narrative. Restaurant staff noticed something else on May 3, something that should have been impossible if the parents were simply following their established routine of quick child checks. A walkie-talkie or sound monitor was left abandoned on the tapas table. If Kate and Jerry were using this device to listen for signs of distress from their children, Why leave it behind while supposedly going to check on them in person? Even more telling was the reaction when Madeleine was declared missing. There was no chaos, no shouting, no hysteria. Just an elderly woman calmly informing staff that a child had disappeared, while the rest of the group remained silent and composed. It was as if they had all agreed in advance how to behave, and then failed to react at all. This controlled response became even more suspicious when investigators realized that some group members were referencing events they couldn't have witnessed, because they weren't present when those events supposedly occurred. It's a classic sign of what psychologists call story contamination, when a single version of events is shared and retold so often that it becomes indistinguishable from personal experience, even for those who weren't there to witness it. The behavioral analysis gets worse. In the days following Madeleine's disappearance, Kate's emotional responses struck experienced investigators as unusual. She was calm when she should have been frantic. Her answers were polished when they should have been scattered. Her grief seemed contained, managed, almost performed. Police noted that she wasn't behaving like a mother searching for her child. She was behaving like someone managing a narrative. Statement analysts identified what they called leakage in Kate's later writings. In the introduction to her book about Madeleine's disappearance, she wrote something that revealed more than she intended. Quote, "There have been many times when I have struggled to keep myself together. I know the truth, we know the truth, and God knows the truth. One day the truth will out," end quote. This isn't the language of a mother demanding justice for her abducted child. This is the language of someone carrying a secret too heavy to bear. She's not speaking as a victim seeking answers. She's speaking as someone who already knows what happened but can't bring herself to say it. The linguistic analysis becomes even more revealing when you examine her repeated phrase about ensuring adequate funding for the long term. Quote, "The reality is we have to ensure we have adequate funding for the long term," end quote. This suggests not an active search for a missing child, but the management of a situation that requires sustained resources over an indefinite period. It's the language of maintenance, not investigation. But perhaps the most damning evidence comes from Kate's own admission about the limitations of her published book. She wrote, quote, "Publishing the truth is fraught with risks. It leaves us open to more criticism," end quote. By her own account, what she published was not the complete truth, but only a version of it, carefully edited to minimize risk and criticism. What risks? What criticism? If your child was genuinely abducted by a stranger, what truth could be too dangerous to publish? What version of events could expose you to criticism beyond what you've already endured? The only logical answer is that the complete truth involves actions or knowledge that would fundamentally change public perception of the case. Bert Stellander's conclusion is as chilling as it is logical. May 3rd was never the day tragedy struck the McCann family. It was the day the performance began. The curtain rose, the lines were delivered, and the world watched what it believed was a crisis unfolding in real time, without ever realizing that the actual crisis had already been resolved 24 hours earlier. The night of all nights wasn't a random emotional outpouring from a stressed mother. It was a farewell. A final goodbye to a daughter who would never wake up to see May 3rd. And everything that followed, every press conference, every police interview, every tearful appeal for information, was an elaborate theatrical production designed to hide one simple, terrible truth. Madeleine McCann was already dead. But if Madeleine died on May 2nd, what happened to her body? How did two parents, surrounded by friends and under intense scrutiny, manage to conceal evidence of their daughter's death while simultaneously staging an elaborate abduction scenario? The answer lies in understanding the sophisticated nature of this deception, and the careful preparation that preceded it. Remember that morning jog on May 2nd? The one where Jerry McCann claimed to have spent 19 minutes running a route that actually takes 12? Those 7 missing minutes weren't just a memory error. They were reconnaissance. They were Jerry McCann familiarizing himself with terrain he would need to navigate later, when visibility was limited and time was critical. The jog wasn't random. It followed a specific path that led to a specific location, a secluded area on the hillside above Praia de Luz where a body could be temporarily concealed. The morning run wasn't exercise, it was a dry run for a disposal operation that would take place under cover of darkness. And that's where Kate's dream becomes crucial to understanding this case. Years later, Kate would reportedly tell police about a vivid dream in which she saw Madeleine's body buried on a hillside overlooking the beach. Most dismissed this as the desperate imagination of a grieving mother. But Bert Stellander saw something different. He saw geographic coordinates. He saw a map drawn by guilt and preserved by the subconscious mind that can't entirely suppress the truth. When Stellander went looking for the location from Kate's dream, he found something that made his blood run cold. A carefully arranged shrine. A heart-shaped circle of stones. A pink flower. A wooden letter M. And most disturbing of all, hidden camera footage that showed Kate and Jerry McCann returning to this exact spot, again and again for 17 years. This wasn't grief tourism. This wasn't a mother visiting a location that reminded her of her missing child. This was what psychologists call romanticizing the grave, a documented behavior where those responsible for a death, whether accidental or intentional, find themselves compulsively drawn back to the burial site. They return not to hide evidence, but to remember, to mourn, to seek some twisted form of redemption. The pattern of visits captured by Stellander's cameras reveals behavior that can't be explained by the official narrative. These weren't random walks or coincidental encounters with a scenic location. These were purposeful returns to a place that held specific, private significance. Kate was even photographed holding a crumpled picture of Madeleine during one of these visits, not for the cameras because there were none, but as a private offering carried up the hill like a pilgrim bearing tribute. If you're starting to feel that sick recognition in your stomach, that realization that everything you thought you knew about this case might be wrong, then leave a comment and let me know. Tell me where you're watching from and what you're thinking right now. Because we're about to dive even deeper into the evidence that's been hiding in plain sight for 17 years. The night of all nights was never just a diary entry. It was a timestamp. A marker left by guilt in the private thoughts of a mother who couldn't bear to record the truth but couldn't stop herself from marking its significance. May 2, 2007 wasn't just another day of their Portuguese holiday. It was the day the McCann family's life changed forever, and the day an elaborate deception began that would fool the entire world. But to understand how they pulled it off, how two parents and their 7 friends managed to coordinate such a sophisticated cover-up under intense international scrutiny, we need to examine the morning jog more closely. We need to understand why Jerry McCann felt compelled to document that 19-minute run in such specific detail, and why those 7 extra minutes might be the key to solving the most famous missing person case in modern history. There's a photograph that changed everything, though almost no one realized it at the time. May 2, 2007, just hours before Madeleine McCann would officially vanish from the world. 2 men in running gear, captured mid-stride on a dusty Portuguese hillside. One of them is Jerry McCann. The other is David Payne. They're jogging past the church of Nossa Senhora de Luz, following a winding path that leads away from the resort, away from their families, away from the tourist areas, into terrain that serves no purpose except to provide cover from prying eyes. The photograph looks innocent enough. 2 friends getting exercise on their holiday. But to Bert Stellander, that image represented something far darker. It wasn't documentation of a casual morning run. It was evidence of premeditation. Because when you're planning to dispose of a body, you don't just hope you'll find a suitable location in the dark. You scout it first. You time the route. You memorize the terrain. You make sure you can navigate it quickly and quietly when it matters. If your pulse is quickening as you realize the implications of what I'm saying, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because this photograph and the lies Jerry McCann told about it afterward might be the most crucial piece of evidence in the entire Madeleine McCann case. And by the time I'm finished breaking it down for you, you'll understand why this seemingly innocent morning jog was actually the smoking gun that proves everything the McCann family told the world was a carefully constructed lie. 3 weeks later, Jerry would write about this jog in his blog. Not a casual mention, but a detailed, specific account that provided far more information than anyone had asked for. He described the route as winding and challenging. He mentioned that the terrain was scenic but difficult. He noted that they passed the local church and climbed into the hills overlooking the resort. And most importantly, he claimed the run took exactly 19 minutes. That level of detail should have been a red flag. When people recall genuine memories, especially under stress, they don't typically remember precise timings for mundane activities. They remember emotions, impressions, general sequences of events. But Jerry didn't just remember this jog. He documented it with the precision of someone who needed to establish an official record. Bert Stellander found this suspicious enough to conduct his own experiment. He put on running shoes, stood at the exact starting point where the photograph was taken, and ran the identical route at a steady, sustainable pace. The kind of pace 2 middle-aged doctors might maintain while jogging on vacation. His time wasn't 19 minutes. It wasn't even close. 12 minutes. 7 minutes faster than Jerry's claimed time. 7 minutes doesn't sound like much, but in the context of this case, it represents a lifetime. 7 minutes is enough time to deviate from the running route. 7 minutes is enough time to explore side paths, to locate secluded areas, to identify potential hiding places. 7 minutes is enough time to conduct reconnaissance for an operation that would need to be executed later, when visibility was limited and time was critical. The discrepancy wasn't a simple memory error. Memory errors don't add time, they subtract it. When people misremember the duration of physical activities, they typically underestimate, not overestimate. They remember being tired, so they assumed they were moving slower than they actually were. But Jerry did the opposite. He inflated the time, suggesting that something other than continuous running had occurred during those 19 minutes. This is where Stellander's theory of controlled visibility becomes crucial to understanding the sophistication of this deception. Controlled visibility is a military concept, but it applies perfectly to criminal behavior. When you need to be in a location for reasons you can't reveal, you first establish a legitimate reason to be there. You create a pattern of innocent presence that normalizes your access to that area. The morning jog wasn't random recreation. It was strategic preparation. Jerry and David weren't just exercising. They were creating an alibi for future movement through that terrain. If anyone later remembered seeing them in the hills above Praia de Luz, it would seem perfectly natural. Just two men following their established jogging route. Nothing suspicious about it. But the most damning aspect of this photograph isn't what it shows, it's what it represents in the timeline of events. This jog took place on the morning of May 2nd, the same day Kate would later describe as the night of all nights in her diary. The same day that restaurant staff would remember as unusual because both Kate and Jerry were absent from their table for extended periods. The same day that, according to Stellander's theory, Madeleine McCann actually died. The sequence becomes chilling when you understand it properly. Morning reconnaissance mission disguised as exercise. Evening crisis in apartment 5A. Night disposal operation using the route scouted earlier. Following morning, preparation for the elaborate abduction scenario that would begin in earnest on May 3rd. This wasn't a panic response to an unexpected tragedy. This was methodical, clinical. It required advanced planning, careful timing, and the kind of cold calculation that most people can't imagine parents applying to their own child's death. But the evidence suggests that's exactly what happened. The jogging photograph reveals something else disturbing about Jerry McCann's mindset during this period. He wasn't behaving like a father enjoying a relaxing family holiday. He was behaving like someone preparing for a crisis he knew was coming. The physical reconnaissance, the precise timing, the detailed documentation afterward, all point to premeditation. But why would Jerry feel the need to document this jog so specifically in his blog? Why provide exact timings and detailed route descriptions for what should have been a forgettable morning run? The answer lies in understanding the psychological pressure of maintaining a complex deception. When you're lying about something crucial, you tend to over-explain peripheral details. You provide more information than necessary because your subconscious is trying to build credibility for the larger fiction. Jerry's blog entry about the jog reads like an alibi being established retroactively. He wasn't sharing a pleasant memory, he was creating an official record that could withstand future scrutiny. The 19-minute timing wasn't a casual recollection. It was a calculated lie designed to account for time that had actually been spent on reconnaissance activities. Stellander's analysis goes deeper into the psychology of this behavior. He notes that Jerry didn't just lie about the duration of the jog. He embellished it with unnecessary positive emotions. He described the run as very enjoyable and mentioned the scenic terrain multiple times. This kind of emotional overlay is common when people are manufacturing false memories. They add artificial enthusiasm to make the lie feel more authentic, both to their audience and to themselves. The jogging route itself reveals strategic thinking about concealment and access. The path led away from populated areas, away from hotel security cameras, away from casual observers. It wound through terrain that provided natural cover while still being accessible to someone carrying a burden in the dark. It wasn't chosen for its fitness benefits, it was chosen for its operational advantages. When Stellander retraced the route, he discovered something else significant. The 7-minute discrepancy coincided perfectly with access to a secluded area that matched the description from Kate's later dream about finding Madeleine's body buried on a hillside overlooking the beach. The extra time Jerry claimed to spend running was exactly enough time to identify and evaluate this location as a temporary burial site. This connection between the morning jog, the evening crisis, and the later dream creates a timeline that makes disturbing sense. Jerry scouts the disposal site in the morning. Madeleine dies that evening. Her body is moved to the scouted location under cover of darkness. Kate's subconscious, traumatized by guilt and grief, later manifest this knowledge as a dream about her daughter being buried in the exact location Jerry had identified during his reconnaissance mission. The photograph of the morning jog captures more than just two men exercising. It captures the moment when innocent family holiday became an elaborate criminal conspiracy. It documents the preparation phase of what would become one of the most sophisticated deceptions in criminal history. And it proves that whatever happened to Madeleine McCann was not a spontaneous abduction by a stranger, but the result of careful planning and deliberate action by people who knew her intimately. If you're feeling the weight of this evidence, if you're starting to see how these seemingly innocent details connect into a terrifying pattern, then you need to stay with me. Because the morning jog was just the beginning. The real proof of this conspiracy lies in what happened next, in the symbols and dreams that would eventually lead Bert Stellander to a hillside shrine that shouldn't exist, and to hidden camera footage that would capture Kate and Jerry McCann returning to the scene of their crime for 17 years. But first, we need to understand Kate's dream. We need to examine the vivid nightmare that revealed geographic details about her daughter's burial location, details that supposedly came from her traumatized subconscious but that matched perfectly with the terrain Jerry had scouted during his extended morning jog. Because that dream wasn't just psychological trauma manifesting in sleep. It was a confession written in symbols, delivered by a mind that couldn't bear to speak the truth but couldn't stop itself from revealing where the body was hidden. The morning jog established the location. The dream confirmed it. And the hidden camera footage proved that 17 years later, the parents are still visiting their daughter's grave, still performing the private ritual of grief and guilt that they can never share with the world. Kate McCann's dream was so vivid, so geographically specific, that it haunted everyone who heard about it. She reportedly told police about a nightmare in which she saw Madeleine's lifeless body buried on a hillside overlooking the beach in Praia de Luz. There were pink flowers scattered around the grave. The location commanded a clear view of the ocean. The terrain was rocky but accessible, hidden from casual view but not impossible to reach. Most investigators dismissed this as the desperate imagination of a traumatized mother. Grief can manifest in terrible ways, and dreams often process our worst fears in symbolic form. But Bert Stellander saw something different in Kate's description. He didn't see symbolism or psychological projection. He saw coordinates. He saw a map drawn by guilt and preserved by a subconscious mind that couldn't entirely suppress the truth. So he went looking for it. If you haven't already, subscribe right now, because what Stellander found when he followed Kate's dream to its logical conclusion will make you question everything you thought you knew about the human capacity for deception. The location exists. The symbols are real. And the hidden camera footage of what happens there will change how you see this case forever. In March 2017, nearly 10 years after Madeleine's disappearance, Stellander climbed into the hills east of the Ocean Club Resort with nothing but Kate's dream description as his guide. He wasn't looking for a body, too much time had passed for that. He was looking for signs, for evidence that someone had treated a particular location as sacred, as significant, as worth returning to despite having no official reason to be there. What he found made his blood run cold. Spot 1, as he would later name it, was exactly what Kate had described in her dream. A secluded area on the hillside with a clear view of the beach below. Rocky terrain that provided natural concealment but remained accessible to someone who knew the way. And scattered throughout the area, as if placed deliberately by human hands, were the symbols Kate had seen in her nightmare. A heart-shaped circle of stones, carefully arranged and maintained despite being exposed to wind and weather for years. A single pink flower, fresh enough to suggest recent placement. Broken twigs arranged to form the letter M. These weren't natural formations. They weren't random debris left by hikers or picnickers. They were intentional, meaningful, maintained by someone who visited this location regularly and treated it as sacred ground. Stellander had found Kate McCann's dream made manifest in stone and flowers on a Portuguese hillside. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Who was maintaining these symbols? How often did they visit? And most importantly, why did this location matter enough to warrant such careful, private attention? The answer came when Stellander installed motion-triggered cameras around Spot 1. He wasn't trying to catch criminals in the act. Too much time had passed for that. He was trying to understand behavior, to document the psychological patterns that might reveal what this place truly meant to the people who kept returning to it. What the cameras captured over the following months was both heartbreaking and incriminating. Kate and Jerry McCann visiting Spot 1 repeatedly, sometimes together, sometimes alone, always quietly, always without their surviving children. These weren't casual hikes or coincidental encounters with a scenic location. These were purposeful returns to a place that held specific, private significance. The footage revealed behavior that forensic psychologists call romanticizing the grave. It's a documented phenomenon where individuals involved in a death, whether through accident, negligence, or intent, find themselves compulsively drawn back to the location where the body was disposed of. They don't return to hide evidence or move remains. They return because the location has become psychologically sacred to them. It's where they go to mourn, to remember, to seek redemption for actions they can't undo or confess. Kate was captured on camera kneeling beside the heart-shaped stone circle, sometimes placing fresh flowers, sometimes simply sitting in silence. Jerry would walk the perimeter of the area, his movements deliberate and measured, as if following a ritual he'd performed many times before. Neither showed any signs of searching or exploring. They moved through the space with the familiarity of people who knew exactly what was there and why it mattered. But the most chilling footage came when Stellander conducted what he called a behavioral trigger experiment. He sent an anonymous email to the McCann family containing just one sentence: "It's about to be discovered." No specifics, no threats, no demands. Just a vague suggestion that something they'd kept hidden was on the verge of exposure. The response was immediate and telling. Within days, both Kate and Jerry returned to Spot 1, not with media attention or police support, but quietly, carefully, as if conducting an inspection. They examined the stone circle, checked the flower placement, walked the entire area as if assessing whether anything had been disturbed. This wasn't the behavior of innocent parents concerned about their missing child. This was the behavior of people protecting a secret they couldn't afford to have exposed. The psychological analysis becomes even more disturbing when you understand what Jerry did during one of these visits. Hidden camera footage shows him walking away from the main symbol area, but before leaving entirely, he pauses at a small, flat stone at the edge of the circle. His hand passes over it lightly just for a moment before he continues walking. It wasn't a stumble or an accidental touch. It was acknowledgement, recognition, perhaps even a form of communication with whatever lay beneath. Stellander calls this gesture the most human confession he's ever witnessed. Not a legal admission made in court, but an emotional one made to the earth itself. Jerry McCann touching that stone wasn't hiding evidence or moving markers. He was saying goodbye, or perhaps asking forgiveness in the only way he felt he could. The dream that led to this discovery wasn't random psychological trauma. It was geographic memory preserved by a mind that couldn't bear to speak the truth but couldn't stop itself from revealing where that truth was buried. Kate's subconscious had provided a map, complete with landmarks and symbols, to the location where her daughter's body had been placed on the night of May 2, 2007. But understanding the psychological significance of Spot 1 is only part of the story. The location itself reveals strategic thinking about concealment and access. It's far enough from populated areas to avoid casual discovery, but accessible enough for someone to reach in darkness while carrying a burden. The terrain provides natural camouflage while still allowing for the careful placement of memorial symbols. It's not a random burial site, it's a carefully chosen location that serves both practical and emotional needs. The timing of the McCann family's visits to Spot 1 also reveals pattern and purpose. They return on significant dates, during periods of renewed media attention, and always when public scrutiny of the case intensifies. It's as if the location serves as their private sanctuary, their place to process grief and guilt away from the performance they maintain for the outside world. Stellander's footage captures something else significant about these visits. Kate often brings photographs of Madeleine with her, not for publicity or media purposes, since no cameras or reporters are present, but as private offerings carried up the hill like a pilgrim bearing tribute to a shrine. This behavior is consistent with what psychologists observe in cases where parents have been responsible for their child's death but can't acknowledge that responsibility publicly. The symbols themselves evolve over time, suggesting ongoing maintenance and emotional investment. The heart-shaped stone circle is periodically refreshed and rearranged. New flowers appear regularly, despite the remote location and lack of foot traffic. The wooden letter M is replaced when weather damages it. These aren't natural phenomena or coincidental arrangements. They're the result of deliberate, repeated human intervention. What makes this evidence particularly compelling is its consistency with other aspects of the case. The location matches Kate's dream description perfectly. The timeline aligns with the period when the McCann family rented their car and cadaver dogs detected the scent of death in the trunk. The behavior patterns documented by the hidden cameras are consistent with what forensic psychologists would expect from individuals carrying the kind of secret this case suggests. Most importantly, the existence of Spot 1 and the McCann family's ongoing relationship with it provides a logical explanation for one of the case's most puzzling aspects. their apparent lack of genuine hope or desperation about finding Madeleine alive. Parents of genuinely missing children don't typically establish memorial shrines in remote locations. They don't ritualize grief in ways that suggest certainty about their child's fate. They maintain hope, pursue leads, and desperately seek any possibility of reunion. But if Madeleine died on May 2nd, if her body was placed at Spot 1 that same night, then Kate and Jerry's behavior makes perfect psychological sense. They're not searching for their daughter because they know she can't be found alive. They're not desperate for leads because they know no genuine leads exist. They're maintaining a public performance while privately grieving at the location where their daughter's remains lie buried. The dream that revealed Spot 1 wasn't prophecy or coincidence. It was confession written in the symbolic language of the traumatized subconscious. Kate McCann's sleeping mind couldn't suppress the geographic truth of what had happened, so it delivered that truth disguised as nightmare, complete with the pink flowers and hillside location that Bert Stellander would later find preserved in stone and maintained with ritualistic care. If you're feeling the full weight of this evidence, if the pieces are starting to connect in your mind in ways that make you uncomfortable, drop a comment and tell me what you're thinking. Because we're about to examine the physical evidence that supports everything these behavioral patterns suggest. We're going to look at what happened 25 days after Madeleine was reported missing, when the McCann family made a decision that would provide forensic confirmation of their darkest secret. They rented a car. And that car, when examined by trained cadaver dogs, would test positive for the scent of human decomposition and trace amounts of blood that matched Madeleine McCann's DNA profile.